fat is good for you. Nutritional fat is good for you. Not excess body fat. That's not good for you. But fat from animal sources especially is good for you. That sounds like a fringe idea to people not part of our broader low and zero carb communities. But if you do the keto diet or carnivore or paleo even, or any of these others, animal fats, are good for you. Our ancestors all knew this. All of our grandparents all the way back down to the beginning of time, they all knew this. They all prized animal products. It's just in the last few decades, we've gotten the weird idea that fat is bad, especially animal fat, especially saturated fat, the boogeyman of nutrition. And we've thought that low fat is a good way to go. And if you're like me and you've struggled with your body weight for a long time, you've fought the body recomposition battle over and over again, you've done your fair share of low-fat dieting. And you notice the one thing that it is it's not sustainable. It's not nearly as sustainable as a low-carb, high-fat diet is of any variety. Why is that? Well, it's because it's unnatural, folks. It's an unnatural diet. I'm preaching to the choir here. I know this is not news for most people, but growing numbers of people, it seems like, are waking up to this. This is the reality. And now some of the academics are picking up on this too, which seems to be good news because when they pick up on it, all of a sudden, the mainstream nutritional media are picking up on this too. And one wonders if there will be any kind of consequence for this, because the one thing that this cannot be compatible with is a low-fat diet and a high-fat animal-based diet. They're not compatible with the plant-based stuff, and they're not compatible really with processed foods, although I don't want to suggest we underestimate the ability of the big food combines to make high-fat, animal-based, what they would call animal-based processed foods that would sit in a can or a box or the freezer aisle. Don't underestimate their ability to do that, folks, to create a Frankensteinian version of a carnivore or ketogenic diet. They've already demonstrated that with a lot of the keto treats that are out there. We have now news of a study from the mainstream media anyway. It came out about a week ago. And this is fascinating because this is slowly picking up steam across the internet. The version I'm going to show you is from MSN. Theirs came from The Telegraph. And the headline is, "Low-Fat Foods Could Cause Tidal Wave of Harm, New Evidence Shows." Tidal wave of harm. That's some pretty dramatic language. And we know the media is very good at this dramatic language. I probably used a dramatic title for my video here. But this is kind of remarkable to see. Because at the core of the standard Western diet and the woes it's caused since the late 1950s to the 1960s is this idea that fat is bad. They've done 1,000 different ways of trying to get people to eat a lower fat diet. Higher protein, low fat, higher carbohydrate, lower fat, whatever it is. They've been trying various different ways to get us to eat this way. And maybe now they're starting to pick up on the problem. Let's take a look at what they have to say, because this is a study out of the United Kingdom, and I'm curious if any American researchers are going to try to duplicate this. It's from the article, quote, "The typical British diet will cause a, quote, tidal wave of harm, experts have warned, as damning new research revealed even eating low-fat and diet-processed foods raised the risks of heart problems. People who eat a lot of mass-produced foods are a quarter more likely to have heart attacks or strokes, one study found. While separate research revealed women who ate high levels of heavily processed foods, including healthy products like protein bars, low-fat yogurts, and brown sliced bread, were 39% more likely to develop high blood pressure, which can lead to serious heart problems." End quote. Okay. You can tell by looking at me, I carry a lot of extra body fat. I've been fighting the body, the battle of the bulge, as it were, since I was a kid. And I have a remarkably good blood pressure. I just had it taken the other day. At my body weight and my age, my blood pressure is lower than a lot of people who are athletic. My resting heart rate, because of my workout routine, is in the mid-50s beats per minute. That's for a guy in his mid-40s who weighs as much as I do. That's remarkable. And that is because I keep to an animal-based diet. As simple as that. If I didn't do that, if I didn't exercise regularly, I would be in a lot of trouble. And the one thing I noticed back when I did try lower fat diets, eating more plant proteins and all that other stuff, all those years ago, my blood pressure was a lot higher than it is now. And it can't be a salt thing. I consume a lot of salt the way most of you who do these kind of diets do. If you're a ketogenic diet or on the carnivore diet, let me know in in the comments how much sodium you take in a day. How many, whether you're measuring it in teaspoons of salt or you're measuring it, weighing it out like I do in grams, whatever amount you consume, let me know. I'm taking in about 5,000 to 7,000 milligrams a day, but that's because I keep to a low-carb diet. My body doesn't retain water, and when you urinate a lot, guess what happens? You flush out your electrolytes. Again, this is Keto 101 stuff, but I'm curious how much sodium you take in, because the lower blood pressure issues that we have are in spite of sodium, which we are also told is a main driver of blood pressure. So it's very curious that people who keep to what we are told conventionally is a healthy way of eating, they all have higher blood pressure and higher risks of heart attack and stroke than those of us on a ketogenic and carnivore diet. Let's get back to this. Quote, scientists took into account the impact of sugar, salt, and fat in the foods, suggesting the processing itself could be harmful to health. Experts said the studies were some of the strongest evidence yet that so-called ultra-processed foods pose serious health risks like the danger to that posed by smoking. They called for a tougher regulation on food companies, including warning labels on packaging and a ban on promoting heavily processed foods like breakfast cereals, fruit-based snack bars, and low-fat meals as, quote, healthy options, end quote. If they got their way, that freezer section, half of the freezer section, if you've ever really looked closely at it, half of the prepared meals are, quote unquote, healthy. Many of them are starting to drift into the low carb area, and I applaud them for it, although that I only applaud them in that it's a relative improvement, right? I mean, it would be better for the freezer section to be nothing but frozen hamburger patties and frozen fish in my mind, but maybe one day we'll get there. But it's really interesting that these same media outlets who rely on the advertising dollars of big agriculture and big processed food companies, they're going after processed foods, the ultra-processed foods. And that's interesting because, as I've said numerous times in videos over the last several months on this channel, you cannot have a plant-based diet on a large scale. You cannot have a societal-wide shift to a plant-based diet without ultra-processed foods. It's simply not going to happen. Yes, we know that there are plenty of vegans and plenty of vegetarians who do a whole food vegan or vegetarian diet. And okay, I applaud them for not consuming ultra-processed foods. But you can't do that on a society-wide level without ultra-processed foods. It's simply not going to be feasible. And so this undercuts the plant-based diet rhetoric too. Go take a look at the fake meat alternatives out there. Beyond Meat, Impossible Burgers. Some of the weirder ones that I have featured in videos here, laughing at them, where they make like edible fake bones to put in these meats. None of those food options are possible on a non-processed diet because those are all ultra-processed foods, loaded with preservatives, loaded with things like weird chemical concoctions that are designed to mimic the appearance of blood or hemoglobin when you bite into those meats. You cook them to look, quote, rare, and they still have like a red fluid that comes out. Never understand why the vegans would want something that looks like meat, but maybe this is for people who are moving away from eating animal products to plant-based products, and they need a fake meat to help them in that journey. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. But you can't have that sort of society-wide change that they want without ultra-processed foods in the equation. It just does not work. There are far too many people and not enough people who know how to produce their own food, and our economy is not localized. You can't do those things without having a localized economy, and that's just not, we're not there. And so I find it fascinating that they have basically taken and destroyed the plant-based meat or plant-based alternatives here just by coming out against ultra-processed foods and coming out against the low-fat food options, because those two things are so inseparably linked together. Do you think this is a sign of hope? Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in.